Finally, we sat down to dinner after a whole hour of drinking and talking. While Sarah mingled with her work friends, I stayed on the sidelines, checking out the faces around the table. I didn't recognize any of them. Sarah never properly introduced me to this circle. They were her friends, not our friends. I positioned myself 3 chairs away from her, like usual. It had been a long time since we sat side by side at these events. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. I fiddled with my food as I watched my wife shine. Sarah had always been the life of every social gathering, while I preferred hanging back in the background. That dynamic worked in the early days of our relationship. Now, 7 years later, the distance between us was wider than the 3 chairs that physically separated us. It was then that I heard my name come up amid the side conversations. Melissa, Sarah's new hire from her department, leaned in toward her with a glass of wine in hand. "So, Sarah, how's married life with John? How long have you two been together again?" Sarah didn't hesitate. With a light, easy laugh, she replied, "Please, he's just my roommate at this point." The table burst into laughter. I froze, fork half raised to my mouth. Conversations continued flowing around me, but her words kept echoing in my head. Roommate, not a husband, not a partner, just a roommate. I swallowed my food without even tasting it. I automatically smiled whenever someone spoke to me, but inside, something fundamental had broken. It was as if I'd finally seen clearly the truth that had been right in front of me for months, maybe years. The dinner dragged on for another 2 hours. Sarah didn't notice anything different about me, a further sign of the chasm between us. In the car, I stayed silent until we got close to home. "So, I'm just your roommate?" Sarah looked up from her phone, frowning. "What are you talking about?" "At dinner. I heard you tell Melissa that I'm just your roommate." Sarah rolled her eyes and went back to staring at the screen. "Oh, John, it was just a joke. You've been so sensitive lately." I got home before she did, thinking about all the times I tried to reignite our connection. The special dinners I prepared, the surprise weekend I planned for her birthday, the attempts to talk about our future, always pushed off for another time. Everything met with the same indifference I was seeing now. When Sarah finally came in, I tried again. "It wasn't funny to me. I know it was just a joke for you, but it shows something real, don't you think? When was the last time we really talked? When did we go out without your friends? When did we do anything as a couple?" Sarah dropped her purse on the table and sighed. That sigh said it all. I was a burden, an exhausting chore at the end of a long night. "I'm tired, John. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" But we didn't talk the next day, nor the day after. Life went on as usual. I left early for work. She got home late. We had silent dinners in front of the TV and went to bed sleeping on our backs. Over that week, I began to see our apartment with new eyes. I noticed how my belongings had slowly been pushed into the corners over the years, how my preferences were never considered in our house decisions, how my presence had become purely functional, someone to split the rent, occasionally cook dinner, and nothing more. I realized then that Sarah was right. I really had become just a roommate. The difference was that she had chosen this arrangement unilaterally while I was still living under the illusion of marriage. On Thursday, Sarah mentioned another party with her coworkers on Saturday. I agreed automatically like always. But inside, something had changed. The initial shock turned into clarity. The sharp pain turned into a quiet, definitive decision. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm went off. Sarah was sound asleep beside me, her body turned away, our usual position. I lay there, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how our distance had become so normal that neither of us even questioned it anymore. I quietly got up and went to the closet. There, among our clothes, the division was clear. My stuff took up about a third of the space, cramped and forgotten. I grabbed a small suitcase from the back of the closet and placed it on the unmade bed on the side opposite Sarah. She didn't even stir. Over the next few days, I began my plan without any fuss. When Sarah was at work or out with friends, I carefully separated my essentials. Important documents were first, the birth certificate, passport, car papers, then a few basic clothes. Not a lot, just enough for a few weeks. The rest could wait. On Friday, I called a college friend who had mentioned having a spare room in his apartment a few weeks earlier. Mark sounded surprised, but he didn't ask many questions when I explained that I needed a temporary place. Man, the room's yours for as long as you need. When do you want to move? Sunday, I replied, feeling an odd calm. After Sarah leaves for brunch with her girlfriends. That night, we sat down to dinner together. Sarah chatted animatedly about the party the next day, mentioning names I barely recognized. I watched her with a new perspective, not with anger or resentment, but with a sad sort of clarity. This woman, who once had been the center of my world, now lived in an entirely different universe. "Are you listening to me, John?" she eventually asked, noticing my silence. "Yeah, sure," I replied automatically. I considered telling her my plans right then, but something stopped me. Maybe it was wounded pride, or just the certainty that my leaving would be yet another inconvenience in her busy life. "The party sounds interesting. You're coming with me, right?" she asked, already turning back to her phone. "Zula, elite. It would be the last time." On Saturday, I woke up determined. Sarah left early to meet some friends before the party. "See you there at 8, she said, closing the door without waiting for a response. As soon as I heard her footsteps fade away in the hall, I began moving my things to the car. I worked methodically, as if I were just doing one more routine task. I transferred the suitcase, a few boxes of books and electronic gear, and my vinyl record collection. Surprisingly, everything fit in just 3 trips to the parking lot. 7 years, reduced to a few boxes in the backseat of my car. At 5 in the afternoon, I sat in the empty living room and wrote a letter. I didn't want to disappear without an explanation. That would have been too cruel, even given the indifference I'd been facing. I also didn't want drama or confrontation. I just wanted clarity. "Sarah, I think we both know this ended a long time ago. You were right that night. I became just your roommate, and neither of us deserves to live like this. I'm leaving the keys on the kitchen table. I've already transferred my share of this month's rent to your account. As for the furniture and other stuff, you can keep it, except for what I've already taken with me. If you need to talk about practical matters, my phone number stays the same. John." I left the letter on the table along with my keys. I took one last look at the apartment where we'd lived for 5 years. I didn't feel the overwhelming emotion I thought I would, only a strange mix of relief and melancholy. I closed the door behind me without looking back. I drove over to Mark's apartment, feeling a freedom I hadn't experienced in years. The weight I'd carried on my shoulders, so familiar that it had become part of me, started to lift. It was only then, sitting alone in the car with my few belongings, that I realized how much I'd let myself disappear in this relationship. Mark greeted me with a strong hug and only a few questions, exactly what I needed. The room was small, but bright, with a view of a nearby park. I put my things on the floor and sat on the empty bed. "I'll buy a mattress tomorrow," I said, more to myself than to Mark. "No problem, man. There's pizza in the fridge if you're hungry. And beer." He closed the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I picked up my phone and saw that it was almost 8, the time I was supposed to meet Sarah at the party. I turned the phone off and tucked it into the empty drawer of the nightstand. That first night, I slept on the floor on a borrowed blanket. It was the most peaceful sleep I'd had in months. The next 3 days went by without any contact from Sarah. I wasn't surprised. She probably assumed I was having one of those moments and would come around once I got over it. I only turned on my phone to check work emails, deliberately avoiding the urge to see if she tried to reach out. On Wednesday, I finally received the first message. "Where's the car insurance bill? We need to pay it by Friday." Not even a "where are you?" or "you okay?" Just a practical question, like I had gone out to buy milk. I replied with the document's location and then turned my phone off again. On Sunday, a week after I left, I got a second message. "John, we need to talk about the rent and the bills. I can't cover everything on my own." That's when I realized she was more worried about the financial fallout from my absence than anything emotional. I arranged to meet at a neutral coffee shop the following week so we could discuss the practical details of the separation. When we finally met, Sarah looked like a stranger. Her familiar face carried an expression she had never worn toward me before, a mix of irritation and discomfort, as if I were an unexpected problem in her busy schedule. "You could have talked to me before just leaving," she said as soon as we sat down. "I tried so many times, Sarah. You just never had the time or the energy. She fiddled with her coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. Well, now I'm in a tough spot. I can't afford that apartment on my own. I can cover the rent until the lease ends in 2 months. After that, you'll have to find a smaller place or a new roommate. The words slipped out naturally, without the resentment I expected to feel. Sarah finally looked me in the eyes, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in ages. So that's it? 7 years in like this. Actually, then a long time ago, Sarah. We're just making it official now. We talked for another half hour about practical details, bills, furniture, health insurance. It was surreal how 7 years of marriage could be undone in a 30-minute chat about logistics. As we said goodbye, Sarah hesitated for a moment. "I'm sorry if I made you feel invisible," she finally said, struggling to find the right words. I nodded, accepting that too-late attempt at acknowledgement. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest we'd get. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah," I replied sincerely. I walked to my car, feeling light. The knot that had been tightening in my chest since that dinner finally began to unravel. Not because Sarah had admitted her mistake or because we had a big reconciliation, but because I had finally recognized my own worth. The following weeks revealed a curious role reversal. While I was building the foundation of my new life, Sarah was dealing with the collapse of the structure she'd built for herself. I didn't keep close tabs on her. Our contact was limited to occasional messages about practical matters. But through mutual friends and social media, I could see hints of her new reality. The first major shift came 2 months after I left, when she had to leave our old apartment. The place we'd chosen together when we were still a couple in love had become financially unsustainable for her alone. Sarah moved to a studio in a more distant neighborhood, far from the trendy cafes and restaurants she once adored. I didn't feel joy over her struggles, just a strange sense of inevitability, as if the universe were rebalancing itself. I got a message from her on moving day. I just handed over the apartment keys. "It's weird to think we'll never go back there." I stared at her words for several minutes, thinking about how to respond. There was no pleasure in her hardship, only a silent confirmation that we were truly heading down separate paths. "It's the end of a chapter for both of us," I finally replied. "I hope the new place feels like home." Meanwhile, my temporary stay at Mark's place gradually became more permanent. The empty rooms slowly came to life. A bookshelf for my books, a comfy armchair in the corner by the window, a new set of sheets that I picked out myself. Little decisions that signified enormous steps toward independence. At work, colleagues noticed the change in me. "You look lighter," commented my supervisor during a meeting. "More present." I didn't go into details about my separation, but I thanked her, silently acknowledging how true it was. I felt more present, not just at work, but in my own life. I started rediscovering interests I'd abandoned over the years. I went back to jazz shows on Sundays, something Sarah always thought was boring. I resumed photography classes, a passion I had set aside when our marriage started demanding that I fill the empty spaces left by her absence. Each little reclaim became a silent affirmation. I'm here. I exist beyond that relationship. 3 months after I left, I unexpectedly ran into Sarah at a cafe near my new workplace. She was sitting alone, staring at her laptop. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should avoid her, but something pushed me forward. "Hi, Sarah." She looked up, surprised. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I had once fallen for, vulnerable, genuine. "John, what a surprise." I sat with her briefly. The conversation flowed more easily than it had in years, perhaps because there were no more expectations or old resentments weighing on us. She told me about her new apartment, the struggle of living alone after so long. She mentioned that some of her friendships had drifted apart. "It's funny," she said with a wistful smile. "When we were together, I was always surrounded by people. Now, it seems like many of those friends were just for social events." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Loneliness has a way of showing you what's superficial and what really matters. Our meeting lasted only about 15 minutes, but it was meaningful. As we said goodbye, I realized I no longer felt anger or bitterness. Sarah had become just someone I once knew deeply, A person from a different time in my life, not a villain or an enemy. 6 months passed, and autumn arrived with its intense colors. One Sunday afternoon, I sat in the park near my apartment, snapping photos of the golden leaves with my new camera. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email from the lawyer. Our divorce had been finalized. I looked at the notification with an odd calm. The attached document officially marked the end of 8 years together, a passionate romance, a promising marriage, and a long, quiet decline. I closed the email without even opening the attachment. The details could wait until tomorrow. That night, Mark and some friends insisted on taking me out for drinks. "We've got to celebrate your official freedom," he joked, but I didn't feel like celebrating. The real liberation had happened months earlier. That night, I decided to value my own presence more than the way my absence had been treated. At the bar, amid laughter and small talk, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Sarah. "I got the papers today. I guess it's officially over. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how everything went down. You deserve more than being just a roommate." It was the apology I had once felt I had desperately needed. 6 months ago, those words would have meant everything to me. Now, they were just a late acknowledgement of something I had already processed and moved on from. "Thanks, Sarah. I hope you find what you're looking for." I put my phone away and rejoined the conversation with my friends, people who really saw me for who I am and appreciated my presence. Over time, I came to understand that the collapse of my marriage wasn't a failure, but a necessary liberation. Sarah and I had both lost ourselves along the way. She, by pursuing social validation, and I, by letting myself fade into invisibility just to keep the peace. We were two mismatched people trying to force together something that never really existed. Sometimes people ask if I regret leaving the way I did, without dramatic confrontations or last-ditch efforts to save our marriage. The truth is, there was never one big, dramatic moment that broke us apart. No infidelity, abuse, or catastrophic event to blame. It was the slow erosion of our connection, the gradual turning of a marriage into a hollow cohabitation, until I became nothing more than a roommate in the life of the person I'd promised to love and respect. And maybe that's the most important lesson I learned. Sometimes the end doesn't come with explosions and shouting, but with a casual remark during a dinner with friends. Sometimes the real ending isn't a huge confrontation or an apology, but just the act of recognizing your own worth and taking a step toward being true to yourself. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. The life I've built for myself now is entirely my own. Every choice, every object, every moment. I no longer need to shrink myself to fit within someone else's margins. I take up all the space I deserve, seen, and valued. Finally, the main character of my own story. And in the end, that is worth far more than any relationship that demands my invisibility as the price of staying.